You don't get to 500 million friends without making a few enemies. Remember that iconic line, Chris?
I certainly do, Olivia. The Social Network, an absolute classic.
Exactly. A masterclass in portraying the startup ecosystem. But it's not just about startups, is it?
You're right. I mean, on the surface, it's about Facebook, Mark Zuckerberg, and his rise. But beneath that, it's really this fascinating whirlpool of complex dialogues, tech jargon, and business conduct.
Exactly, Chris. And those dialogues, they're in English, but it's not just everyday English. It's business English. And that's why we selected this movie for our podcast today.
Exactly. Business English, but with a twist. It's not your regular corporate setting. It's the fast-paced world of IT startups. That's a whole new language.
Couldn't agree more, Chris. And it's really intriguing how the screenwriters conveyed this intricate tech world and its slang so effectively. To be honest, I wasn't familiar with some of the terms used in the film.
Well, Olivia, honestly, there's no better place in the world of film to understand tech business communication, and I'll do my very best to help you and our listeners with those technical terms.
I can't wait, Chris. It's an excellent opportunity to learn more about IT sector lingo. I'm pumped for today.
So, as we venture into the realm of IT jargon, let's start with a term that is used a lot in the social network, and that's API. It stands for Application Programming Interface.
APIs. I've heard this reference in many tech conversations. Could you explain a bit about it in layman's terms?
Sure thing, Olivia. Simply put, an API is like a waiter in a restaurant. When a customer, which is an application like Facebook or Twitter, makes an order, a request, the waiter, the API, goes to the kitchen, the database, to fetch your order, the data.
Oh, that analogy clears things up. Going by the movie script, it seemed like APIs were crucial for Facebook's initial development. So, they are the middlemen computers.
Exactly. And not just for Facebook. APIs are pretty much essential for all modern tech companies. Another term that pops up frequently is algorithm. Algorithms are everywhere in our digital lives, but they are especially important in the tech world.
True. I often hear how Facebook's or YouTube's algorithm changes can cause a stir. And they're just step-by-step instructions, right?
Yes, they are a lot like recipes. Algorithms specify clear instructions for a computer to carry out to accomplish a particular task or to solve a specific problem.
Right. Without algorithms, there'd be chaos. Now, scalability. That's another one. It appeared quite a bit, particularly around the growth phases of Facebook in the movie.
In the tech context, scalability is about capability of a system to handle a growing amount of work or its potential to accommodate growth. For instance, can Facebook handle 100 more users, 1,000, 1,000,000?
Okay, Chris. So, suppose I was having a casual lunch with a potential investor. Let's imagine that she's curious about our company's technical facet. How would technical jargon possibly enter our conversation?
Interesting scenario, Olivia. In that case, the investor might ask you about how your developers are dealing with scalability, given the rapid growth of user base. She might be anxious if you have robust APIs built in order to cope with an influx of new users and to seamlessly integrate third-party software.
Right. So, I'd reassure her that our technical team is very proficient. They've designed resilient algorithms to handle the platform's demands and growth, ensuring smooth user experience, while our APIs provide seamless software integration.
Exactly. That covers the key points beautifully. This conversation you simulated does a great job of showing how technical jargon often becomes part of business talks, especially for tech startups like the one depicted in Social Network.
Ah, I see. Speaking of which, I remember a scene in the movie where Eduardo confronts Mark about the server costs. It's a perfect segue into server, another common IT term. Would you kindly explain that, Chris?
That's a great segue, Olivia. In very simple terms, a server is like a giant, ultra-powerful computer that stores and sends data. When you use Facebook or any other application, for instance, your device sends a request to a server, which then sends back the requested information. Similar to how you order food from a restaurant.
Tech jargon can be real tongue twisters, Chris. Any practical advice for our listeners on how they can understand and remember these terminologies?
Sure, Olivia. I'd advise start with understanding the basics and gradually increasing your exposure to more complex terminologies. Most tech companies often have their internal wiki or documents that explain their specific terminologies. Starting there could be a good beginning. Also, engaging more with your tech team can help you learn in a more casual, less intimidating environment.
I've also found that using a word in context aids in solidifying its meaning for me. Would that work with tech jargon too?
Absolutely, Olivia. Applying the terms in conversation or just thinking about the concept can help hugely. It can be challenging at first, but practice really does make perfect. You can try that while watching movies like Social Network. Use the scenes as a way to apply and understand the jargon you've been trying to grasp.
Thank you, Chris. That is honestly very useful. Now, moving on. I am curious. Has there been an instance where a misinterpretation due to a lack of understanding of tech jargon has led to complications or major issues?
Yes, Olivia. It happens more often than we'd like to admit. A classic example was a dialogue from Social Network itself, where the misinterpretation of server costs led to a major conflict between two co-founders. Misunderstanding the concept can lead to unrealistic expectations, and that can snowball into larger issues. Olivia, do you remember the scene where Eduardo confronts Mark about the expanding server costs in Social Network?
Yes, I do, Chris. That was quite a powerful moment. The tension was palpable.
Indeed. That's the very intellectual conflict I'd like to refer to. These scenes exist not just for dramatic effect, but they can also serve as an educational tool in understanding how language and rhetoric tone can change during conflicts.
True, Chris. If you listen closely, you'll notice a change in the way both characters communicate. They use their words as weapons, in a way. The dialogue script suddenly becomes fast-paced, direct, and much less friendly.
Yes. From my observation in the tech scene, the language tends to be direct, no nonsense during such power struggles. The words are chosen carefully to articulate the precise point, masking personal emotions as much as possible.
Seems a lot like a strategic communication play. What's interesting about this scene is how each character's words reflect their own viewpoints and intentions. It seems to highlight the importance of effective communication and the ability to stand your ground.
Exactly. This is why understanding both the broader theme as well as the nuances of language is critical. Even the subtle word choices and the tone used can provide valuable insights into what may be actually unfolding. Should we dive into more details or move to the next topic? Olivia, let me evoke a defining scene in Social Network. Remember when Mark says, "If you guys were the inventors of Facebook, you'd have invented Facebook." To the Winklevoss twins?
Oh, absolutely. That was such a bold statement. It had intellectual aggression all over it.
Exactly. So, I'll role-play that dialogue in a nutshell. I believe I have made something better than you did. And if you had truly invented it, you would not be arguing with me about it now. It's not a literal translation, but it captures the essence of Mark's aggressive stand.
Interesting. So, the key to his verbal prowess is this relentless confidence. Chris, do you think his aggressive stance is necessary in this context?
Well, it certainly helps him to assert his position, doesn't it? Sometimes, in the business world, such assertiveness can signal conviction, clarity of thought, and can effectively shut down arguments. Remember, though, it's a balance. Too much aggression can rub people the wrong way.
So, the takeaway here is to use such intellectual conflict dialogues wisely. Understand the impact of your words and deliver them with careful tact. A well-placed, sharp comment could sway a situation in your favor, but the timing and tone have to be spot on.
Couldn't agree more, Olivia. So just to sum up, the key to mastering dialogues during intellectual arguments is a combination of confidence, clarity, and a dash of aggression. What do you think, Olivia? Can we now transition towards the next topic?
Sure, let's do that.
Hey, Olivia. Ever noticed how Social Network brilliantly captures the pulse of the American startup culture?
Absolutely. It's one of the things that makes this movie such an interesting case for us. So, Chris, what do you think are a few key elements of the startup culture that are well portrayed in the movie?
I'd say risk-taking, innovation, and that we assemble the plane as we fly spirit. It's this constant hustle, but most importantly, it's the dialogue that brings out these nuances.
I couldn't agree more. Can you quote a dialogue that encapsulates these cultural nuances?
Surely. So when Sean Parker says, "We lived on farms, then we lived in cities, and now we're going to live on the internet," it captures the audacious visionary outlook, a hallmark of the tech startup world.
Spot on. And from a linguistic perspective, such statements make heavy use of figurative language. They're not meant to be taken literally, but they intuitively communicate concepts and visions. It has a motivational and inspiring impact, pumping up the team, attracting investors, and so on. Were there another dialogue, Chris, that embodies this cultural vibe?
$1 million isn't cool. You know what's cool? $1 billion. This is classic startup ambition. It reflects the mindset of go big or go home and the relativity of success in this context.
Those dialogues are classic indeed. They conveys the audacious visionary aspect of startup culture. They're quick, punchy, assertive, and loaded with ideological implications that mirror the high-stakes nature and the dynamism of this scene. It's essential to call out, though, that real-life business communication isn't always this dramatic or grandiose, but it's important to capture the spirit. These dialogues indeed encapsulate the culture of ambitious, risk-taking startups. But Chris, isn't there a specific cultural element we often hear about in relation to the tech startup scene?
You mean the tech bro culture?
Exactly. The term tech bro has gained a lot of traction over the years. It's often associated with a certain persona, right?
Right, often young, ambitious, seemingly fearless males who dominate the tech startup scene, generally associated with certain personality traits and work ethics. But it's important to state that it's a generalization, and not every male in tech fits into this bracket.
Certainly, we have quite a few examples of this in Social Network, don't we?
We do. Interestingly, Mark Zuckerberg is the quintessential tech bro in the film. His overall demeanor, his fast-paced, straight-to-the-point conversation style, even down to his informal attire, all hint at this culture. There's a dialogue where Eduardo says to Mark, "You're going to go through life thinking that girls don't like you because you're a nerd. And I want you to know from the bottom of my heart that that won't be true. It'll be because you're an asshole." I hate using that term, but the dialogue illustrates this culture where being unapologetically assertive and bold is often portrayed.
Interestingly, it does illustrate something many have critiqued about the tech bro culture, namely the idea of masking emotional obliviousness, lack of empathy, or disrespect under the garb of being straightforward or intensely focused on the work at hand.
That's quite an astute observation. Though startup culture does promote a go-getter attitude, it should not condone rudeness or lack of basic respect.
Chris, I've noticed how unique the dialogues are, especially in the tech startup scene of Social Network.
Could you elaborate on that a bit more, Olivia?
Sure, I'm talking about the language style that's distinct to the startup scene. The characters use plenty of casual language, mixed with jargon, resulting in this distinctive, quick-paced, and sometimes elusive lingo. But there's more. It's not merely about words and phrases, it's about expressions, speech speed, clarity, and even pauses.
I think I get what you mean. The way a character speaks tells us about the culture of the environment they operate in, right? Like how Mark Zuckerberg's character, he is assertive and confident, often impatient and curt, much like the tech scene.
Absolutely. Let's roleplay a scene showcasing these traits. I think the conversation between Mark and Sean Parker depicts precisely what we're discussing. Sean is attempting to convince Mark to drop the and just call it Facebook. He casually utters, "Drop the, just Facebook. It's cleaner."
Interesting. The power dynamic is vivid in that dialogue. Mark's hesitant response, "Just Facebook," showcases his initial reluctance but eventual yielding to Sean's influence. It also signals a critical turning point in Facebook's growth trajectory. The simplicity and directness of the dialogue is so potent.
Right. The language is casual, but the stakes are high. The choice of words, the pace, the intensity, all contribute to the compelling narrative. This pronounced contrast is not impromptu, but is an intrinsic part of a breakthrough startup, making it alluring and elusive at the same time.
And it's this very complexity that makes these movie dialogues such an excellent model for our listeners to grasp business English in real-life scenarios. Olivia, I'd like to delve into some colloquial language used in social network. For example, when a character refers to scaling up. It feels so natural and casual, yet it's technical startup lingo that can baffle a few. Scaling up refers to a strategy for expanding the business.
Absolutely, Chris. But more than the words being used, it's important to consider the speed and clarity. Business jargon can be intimidating to outsiders, but with dialogues paced briskly, yet enunciated clearly, it becomes more accessible.
I see your point, Olivia. Would you say the movie does a good job in demonstrating both formal and informal language within the tech business scene?
Great question, Chris. The movie does achieve an interesting mix. The characters switch between formal and casual language, showing the versatility needed in a startup scene. Like when Eduardo confronts Mark over the dilution of his shares. It's formal, yet heated language fueled by personal emotions, giving us a glimpse of an intense business confrontation.
Is there a certain scene where you think our listeners could learn a lot from, in terms of speed, pronunciation, and clarity?
An excellent instance is when Mark and Eduardo are arguing about the company's expansion. Mark is fast yet distinct, while Eduardo is slower, emphasizing his disbelief. The pacing, tone, and intensity all contribute to the impact of the conversation. You are not an asshole, Mark. You are just trying so hard to be. Do you remember this statement, Chris? It's from the heated boardroom scene in The Social Network, a powerful reflection of the negativity cloaking a business negotiation.
Yes, I remember it well, Olivia. It's when Eduardo Saverin, played by Andrew Garfield, confronts Mark Zuckerberg, portrayed by Jesse Eisenberg. These two characters have been friends, partners, and then the relationship gets complex. Now let us go a step further. Could we try role-playing this intense scene?
Sure. I am game. It's an excellent scene to help our listeners understand how language shifts during negotiation and how phrases can create impact during discussions. Let's give it a spin. You're Mark, and I'll be Eduardo.
Sounds good. Eduardo, it's not like I'm not sympathetic to your situation, but you signed the papers. You set me up. You're going to blame me because you were the business head and you made a bad business deal with your own company.
This is going to be like I'm not part of Facebook. It wasn't supposed to be a diversion, Mark. This is our thing. Now you want to dismiss me and wipe out everyone who helped build this.
You're supposed to be my friend. Friendship is stronger than all this, right? What's on the line here is business. These were the business decisions I needed to make. It's not personal.
I see where you're coming from, Chris. Though, it's not personal, it's strictly business. This negotiation goes beyond its initial purpose. It hits on emotions and tests the dynamics of language. Am I right?
Absolutely, Olivia. Notice how language shifts from formal business terminologies to raw emotional appeals. The conflict escalation is attributable to the shift in tone, delivery, and phrases. The dialogue progression moves with the intensifying situation.
You have part of my attention. You have the minimum amount. This line, Chris, is a textbook example of confrontation.
Yes, Olivia. It surely is. The quote is from a confrontation scene between Mark Zuckerberg and the Winklevoss twins. I believe this dialogue paints a picture of Mark's nonchalant assertiveness tinted with intellectual superiority. The tone, the language style reinforces Mark's self-assured, no-nonsense personality.
I see your point, Chris. Mark's harsh tone and bluntness make it feel like a punch in the gut. This reflects how self-assured he is despite the confrontational setting. On the flip side, could Mark's abrasive style result in misinterpretation of his intent?
It could be possible. Often in such high-stress situations, language use and tone delivery could lead to misinterpretation, aggravating the situation. For instance, Mark's dismissive tone could be interpreted as arrogance, potentially alienating his colleagues.
Right. A good example was when Mark says to Eduardo, "If your clients want to sit on my shoulders and call themselves tall, They have every right to give it a try. How would you interpret this, Chris?
Well, he's essentially saying that Eduardo and his clients were trying to ride his coattails, benefiting from his hard work rather than making an effort themselves. It's an intellectual altercation, using his wit as a weapon. But such contentious statements carry the risk of escalating conflicts.
Agreed, Chris. Consequences aside, Mark's dialogue is a good case study for mastering the art of dialogue confrontation. It's all about a mix of assertiveness, confidence, and a dash of derisive wit, all the while keeping your composure.
Yes, learning to balance all these elements is essential in mastering confrontation dialogue. So the key takeaway here is how non-verbal cues, tone, and choice of words reflect our personality.
You offer me percentage of Facebook? It's been stolen. Now, this dialogue certainly stirred up a lot of controversy.
Yes, it indeed did, Olivia. This dialogue is from the scene where Sean Parker, the co-founder of Napster, joins Mark Zuckerberg's team, leading to the unceremonious exit of Eduardo Saverin, Mark's best friend and the CFO of Facebook.
From a business ethics standpoint, what message does this dialogue send?
Well, it throws light on a critical issue, Olivia. It showcases business dynamics including collusion and betrayal, a distressing aspect, yet crucial reality. The dialogue hints towards the questionable means used by someone to gain control over something that they didn't solely create.
Moreover, it speaks volumes about value proposition, doesn't it? Is it about offering the percentage or the fact that it's perceived as stolen that makes it unacceptable?
Absolutely, Olivia. It emphasizes that ethics should form the basis of any business deal, regardless of the attractiveness of the proposition. Transparency and trust are indispensable.
Chris, any other dialogue from Social Network that sparked debate?
Certainly, Olivia. Remember when Eduardo confronts Mark and says, "I deserve recognition." This was after he found out about Facebook's dilution stunt. This dialogue reflects the disregard to moral, ethical obligations towards co-founders and employees.
Again, the recurring theme of betrayal. The movie sure portrays a lot of ethical dilemmas. Understanding and analyzing these dialogues, we get to explore the murky waters of business ethics portrayed on the silver screen. You can't get to 500 million friends without making a few enemies. While this dialogue itself serves as a mantra for Mark Zuckerberg's character, it also perfectly encapsulates his resolute and relentless nature, doesn't it, Chris?
Absolutely, Olivia. Mark Zuckerberg is portrayed as highly determined, focused, and somewhat unemotional. His dialogues, crisp and direct, reflect this. Take, for instance, "This doesn't need to be a scene," where he sidesteps emotion to focus on practicality.
A stark contrast to the character of Eduardo Saverin, who's portrayed as more passive, sacrificial almost. He places trust and emotions over shrewd business decisions, and this reflects in his dialogues. Remember the line, "You set me up."
Yes, that line was quite the revelation and a testament to Eduardo's emotional investment in his relationships. On the other hand, we have the character of Sean Parker, played by Justin Timberlake. Confident, charismatic, and manipulative, his dialogues are often packed with wit and charm. His famous quote, "$1 million isn't cool, you know what's cool," $1 billion reflects his ambitious, risk-taking nature.
Truly. And such dialogues, they don't just serve the narrative. They offer us keen insights into the mindset, the personality of the characters. Now let's try reenacting these lines, Chris. I'll start with Mark's dialogue. "Look, a guy who built a nice chair doesn't owe money to everyone who ever built a chair."
Quite confrontational, very Mark. I'll give Eduardo's line a shot. "With the right mix of betrayal and disbelief, you set me up."
And let me not forget the iconic Sean Parker final touch. "With all the charm and persuasion, $1 billion.
Without making a few enemies. That certainly takes us back to Mark.
Even amidst heated tensions, Social Network sprinkled humor in their dialogues, didn't they?
True, despite the intense battles and conflicts, there was an underlying layer of humor that really lightened the overall tone. Let's take a moment to highlight some of those lines, like Mark's fairly sarcastic, "You have part of my attention, you have the minimum amount. The rest of my attention is back at the offices."
Yes, that definitely brought a laugh. Zuckerberg's character was designed to be blunt and dismissive, that's for sure. Another one was, Sean Parker says we have a better name. And Eduardo, frustrated, retorts ironically saying, and what is that? Pretty witty in a tense situation, wouldn't you say?
Definitely. A good comeback always contains an element of surprise, which can often come in the form of humour. A fine example is when someone commented, I don't know what makes you think I can do this. And Parker responded with, you shouldn't think, you should jump. The unexpected response made it amusing.
Clearly, humor is not just for laughs. It's a strategic tool that can be used to diffuse tension, highlight absurdity, or underline the seriousness of the situation. On that note, we wrap up our dissection of social network. Before we sign off, Chris, any final thoughts?
Humour in business dialogues reflects more than just a light-hearted attitude. It demonstrates cleverness, resourcefulness, and the ability to keep cool under pressure. It's really the balance between the serious and the witty that can make any conversation memorable and impactful. So, I would encourage our listeners to understand and practice this balancing act in their business conversations.